Is Steven Avery guilty or innocent? And what really happened to Teresa Halbach? Hello and welcome to Who Killed Who. That is exactly what we are here today to discuss. The way I'm going to do this video is to give you a quick recap of the case, then dive into the arguments that making a murderer made, give you the arguments that convicting a murderer made, and then tell you in the end my own opinion and if Steven and Brendan deserve a retrial. Please be aware that I am not an expert. I do not have any fancy credentials. I am simply someone who has been heavily interested in this case since 2015 when the documentary came out. Just like many of you, and when I give my opinion, that is exactly what it is, my opinion. If you are like me and cannot help but want to know more about cases like this, please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I am also aware that this is a very controversial case, and please be kind to others in the comments. And with that, I think it's time to dive right in. Teresa Marie Halbach was born on March 22, 1980 in Wisconsin. She grew up with her two brothers and two sisters on a dairy farm close to Green Bay. Her friends and family describe her as a very energetic and spontaneous person who always lightened the room and made others feel better just being around her. Her passion in life was photography, and she had been working as a photographer for Auto Trader magazine. Her job was to go out to several properties and businesses and take pictures of vehicles that people were trying to sell. On October 31st, 2005, Teresa showed up to the Autos Avery salvage lot to photograph a vehicle and then was never heard from again. Her mother officially reported her missing on November 3rd, 2005. By November 5th, there were large search parties on the Avery's property looking for her. It was on this day that Pam Sturm, one of the searchers, found Teresa's vehicle within about 15 minutes of her searching. As time and searches went on, Teresa's bone fragments would be found in Avery's fire pit and in a quarry on the property. Steven Avery was arrested November 11, 2005 for her murder, kidnapping, assault of the intimate kind, and mutilation of a corpse. But who is Steven Avery? Well, Avery was born on July 9th, 1962 in Manitowoc County. He had grown up there and had a bit of a history that we will get into later. Steven Avery was arrested at the age of 22 in 1985 after the attempted R-word and M-word of a lady and was sentenced to 32 years. But 18 years into that sentence, he was exonerated with DNA evidence and he was completely innocent and was released in 2003. When Avery was released, he was absolutely viewed as a local hero and went back to his family's big 40-acre property and started working in the family business again. Things seemed to be working out wonderfully for him, especially when in 2005, he was a couple of months away from going through a lawsuit that he had brought against the county for $36 million. That was until Teresa went missing and he was arrested again. People were understandably dumbfounded that this innocent man was now back in prison and being convicted of horrible charges that would put him away for the rest of his life. That is where, in 2007, when his trial was beginning, that Making a Murderer's crew got involved and closely followed Steven and his nephew Brendan and the rest of the family. The Netflix documentary came out around the holidays in 2015, and it was a massive hit, and millions of people binge watched those first 10 episodes and were outraged. People began banding together with signs outside of the courthouse and signing petitions to have them released. The reason being is that the documentary did a very, very great job about making a man that was already once convicted and was innocent having the same horrible things done again to him, and that the police had tried very hard to set him up. Now, before I go through the documentary's strongest arguments, I will say that I was also someone that was leaning about 40% innocent. I thought they did a wonderful job showing a lot of the defense talking and that they had some very strong points. But I also thought the investigation was very warped and biased. And no matter what, I always thought that there was just something off about Steven. And I can honestly say that as a young woman, especially then, I wouldn't want to be alone with him. Again, just my own personal opinion. So diving into the arguments that the documentary made. The first one that definitely made me personally raise my eyebrows is that of the lawsuit. This lawsuit was against the same county, and officers that had been disposed in the case are the same ones that found the blood that matched Avery's DNA in her car. The same ones that checked and made sure it was her vehicle. And the same ones that discovered her bones weeks later in the fire pit. Right off the rip, this screamed conspiracy. To add to this, the documentary made sure to say over and over again that because of the lawsuit, Manitowoc County Police were not supposed to be involved in the case at all, in any way, and yet they were the ones that found all of the incriminating evidence. Another strong point they make is that there were no other murder suspects that the police looked into. And even though there were 3 strong people that should have been looked into, they were ignored, and that the police only focused on Avery from the beginning. Those other suspects were Bobby Dassey, Steven's nephew that testified he saw Teresa taking pictures that day, placing her at the property. Ryan Hillegas, Teresa's ex-boyfriend that the police allowed to help with the search parties, and the Zipperer family that was Teresa's stop that day before the Averys. Then you have the 4-hour interview with Brendan Dassey that looked like the police were making up the story and getting Brendan to agree to it and admit details even though he was portrayed as a very mentally struggling 16-year-old and that they did not allow his mother to be present. We also can't forget the interview with the juror that was excused because of a family emergency that strongly believed in his innocence and thought it was strange that he was convicted and found guilty. Oh, and a huge discrepancy was the key that was just found by the same officers in question, and the house had previously been searched 7 times and it had no DNA from Teresa, but it did have Steven's DNA on it. Then the bombshell about the open evidence box that held the vial of Steven's blood. I will never forget the first time I watched it, and when they said that it had a needle hole on the top of the vial, that was truly the first time I wondered to myself if maybe the police had planted some of his blood in the vehicle. It was also very strange that there was no evidence of DNA, blood, or fluids of any kind in the trailer. Making a Murderer did a great job at making me take a step back and question why he would have done all this with no motive and with the possibility of being months away from being $36 million richer. But then Convicting a Murderer came out, and many of my questions were answered. Many things were disproven, and it begs the question of when it comes to a documentary, if it is completely one-sided and has an agenda the entire time, can it truly be labeled a documentary? Now, let's get into all of these discrepancies and the new information that we now know. Right off the gate, one of the biggest discrepancies that was portrayed incorrectly was that the police were not allowed to be a part of this investigation. First off, Manitowoc is tiny, and other counties around this area are also tiny. The actual rule that was decided to keep the case safe was that absolutely no elected officials would be part of the investigation, and that was upheld. No officials that were elected from the police to the coroner's office were involved in any way. The Manitowoc County did bring in other counties and did work with them, and they were very careful when on the property. That is why there were so many searches that were conducted, is that when they went in, they were not ripping up the place. Also, every time the Manitowoc police were on the scene, there were police from other counties present. To add to this, the police were being very careful, and there had been 7 entries, but not searches. Every time they went in, they had specific things they had to get. Guns, the vacuum, etc. As far as the lawsuit is concerned, they made a massive deal about these cops being extremely biased, and this was the reason they wanted to set him up. But the funny thing is that the lawsuit money would not be coming out of the cops' own pockets and would not affect them in any way. Even though Colbert had been disposed as a witness when the original case happened that the county was being sued for, he was actually out of the country and in the military. The only reason he was deposed is because he took a phone call and transferred it about the information that Avery could be innocent. The next argument about not looking into other suspects has actually revealed how much Making a Murderer edited the police calls and the police video to fit the narrative that they were only looking at Steven Avery. At the end of the first episode, they play a recording where the officer says that the boss has a change of plans and we need to go back to the Avery residence. In the full recording, they cut off the part about going back to the Zipperer residence as well and how much it's going to piss off the Zipperers. That's crazy. When it came to Bobby Dassey, who was only 19 at the time, he had an alibi, and he was with another person that did go hunting with him that afternoon, and even Brendan would back that up in his confession. Ryan Hilligus had also been with Teresa's brothers around the time and working at this time, and all of his time was accounted for, and we know this because the police actually did look into this. The interview with the juror is something that really frustrates me. To my knowledge, he is the only one of the jurors that has come out, and he came out with making a murderer. And it makes me wonder if he had some kind of an agenda. At the end of the day, whatever the evidence that was shown in that court, that was enough for the jury in the end to convict him, whether or not he was innocent the first time. They could have chosen to have a mistrial, and they convicted him. Now, let's briefly cover Brendan Dassey's interview. There is so much to unpack on this subject, and I plan to do an entirely separate video diving into this matter, but a few points that I need to bring up is that Making a Murderer portrayed that Brenda, Brendan's mother, had been kept out of the room on purpose. That is entirely incorrect. She was called and informed. She did come to the station, and Brendan said she did not need to be in there. Brenda did not fight this and chose to go outside and smoke cigarettes. Like I said, there is so much to unpack in here, and his confession for right now, I am just bringing up the inconsistencies of what the documentary showed and what the actual truth is. Now, the key. The key was yet another very skewed argument about how it was found. It was not found the first few times looking because it was in a place behind his starts with a P, ends with orn, rhymes with corn. I'm just going to say his prawn. And in the back of a side table. The policeman that entered that day had been told to go out and specifically remove all of the prawn's stash. They were accompanied by police from another jurisdiction. After removing the material from around the bookshelf, or you can call it a cabinet, it had fallen out from behind an area in the back. This brought in a huge argument that how could they find Teresa's key without her DNA and only Steven's on it? What they did not show was the expert's explanation that if Avery had wiped off the key and then had handled it again, possibly while he was hiding it, he would be the last one to touch it, and that would have transferred his touch DNA. This makes much more sense, and many of us in the true crime world has learned a lot about touch DNA, especially with the Kohberger case. It is now time to talk about the bombshell blood vial. Well, what they did not show in court, and again the documentary left out, is that when you take blood this way, the needle is placed in your arm, and the blood comes out and it enters the top of the vial. This immediately ruins this whole entire theory. And there was actually a nurse that was ready to testify that was never needed to even be called on. The defense actually dropped this out of the case in the end, and the broken seal was because of his exoneration case. The record, the court record, actually showed it was his own previous lawyers that had broken the seal, and it was approved by the court. His own lawyers in this case also fought against the blood being tested, but again, the other documentary does not show that. 600 pages were also released, and the blood in the car did not have any EDTA in it. Let's talk about that blood in the vehicle. Teresa's blood was actually found in the back, and it was in a pattern that looked like bloody hair from a head wound. Avery's blood was found in 6 different areas in the vehicle. The reason it is controversial is because beside the steering wheel, it looks smudged, and in other places it looks like droplets, and then in other places it's crusty. Well, in news interviews shortly after, Avery has a very deep gash on his finger. It is extremely likely that he reopened the gash during everything that had taken place, and it now, as he's going through the car, had started to try to dry up again, explaining why his blood was found in all 3 of these different states. Now, my last but not least argument is why was there not any evidence in the trailer? In Brendan's own confession, he stated that the wound to Teresa's neck was not that deep. He said that Steven did stab her, but never mentions him pulling the blade out. That could indicate that there wouldn't be much fluids in the home. When you and I'm sure, as I did, think about that kind of motion, when you pull it out is when you get the splatter. If that didn't happen, it would contain a lot of that. To add to this, it was shown that Steven had cleaned his carpets and then returned his rug doctor that was brand new the very next day after Teresa went missing. Steven was not known to be a man that ever did any deep cleaning. Actually, Jody, his fiance at the time, had gotten the rug doctor. Next, he had rearranged his room in a way that he had been explicitly told to not, because the floor was sagging and rotting in that area, but he decided to randomly move his bed over to. This, to me, looks like a man that is heavily trying to cover up something that had happened in his room. He also admitted to washing all of the bedding and shampooing the carpet on a jail call. Then, when you talk about the garage, again, a lot of information was left out. there were actually 2 bullet fragments found, and one matched the gun that Steven kept in his house. Again, the expert's testimony was edited. The bullet was nearly intact, and they may not have found testable blood, but they did find evidence of gas, bleach, and paint thinner, and even Brendan's pants from that evening had bleach spots all over them. I could sit here for hours and go back and forth, and I do plan on going live with one of my friends and possibly dissecting the main evidence points. But between diving into the bone fragments and how they were found intertwined to a tire, to eyewitness accounts in the family spotting Avery burning a fire in the same barrel that Teresa's electronics were found in, that again was never shown in Making a Murderer, I am without a doubt convinced that Steven Avery did indeed end Teresa's life. It has been stated by many women that knew him that he believed every woman owed him after the 18 years he spent, the 12 years, 6 of those years were on a charge he received against a family member that I could do an entire other episode on. I believe his motive was that he thought he was untouchable after what had happened to him previously. I also wonder what those 12, 18 years in prison had done to him mentally. I think that he was able to get Teresa in his trailer and overpower her. I think in his sick mind, he got Brendan over and pushed him into being part of this sick fantasy. I think that after she did not pass away on the bed, he transported her into the garage and ended her there. After burning her remains, he used the golf cart and went around the property to try to make it harder to find her, but missed a lot because he didn't have time. I also believe that he planned to crush her car, but with all the searchers on the property so fast, he did not get the opportunity. And even yet, I do believe that he and Brendan should get a new trial. One that is open to the public with cameras in the courtroom. I believe that at this point, that is the only way to quiet all of the rumors, and I truly believe that he will be convicted all over again. And possibly Brendan would make a choice to actually take a deal and be a witness. Y'all, the crazy thing is, if Brendan would have taken the original deal that Making a Murderer made it seem like his lawyers were out to get him, his lawyers were trying to help, he would already be out right now. He would not be in prison anymore. As I've stated before, this is all my opinion on this case and the documentaries that have been made. I truly hope that moving forward, the attention this has gotten will push documentary makers to show all of the evidence and be transparent. But what do you think? Is that wishful thinking at this point? I hope that if you have questions, you will bring them up in our live videos. I always encourage you to voice them, but again, please be respectful of others. At the end of the day, regardless of how much attention Steven and Brendan have gotten because of this case, the true victim that gets lost constantly in all of this is Teresa Halbach. She was an amazing woman, had so much potential, and it was ended. And it was ended in such a fashion that it has truly ended her legacy in so many ways because of all of the attention getting put over there. So with that, I will see you in the next video when we find out who killed who.